this is Anita. So today I'm just shooting a quick demo video just to kind of run through how to make a slab coil pot. So what I'm going to start with first is I have just the kind of remainder of a bag of clay, and I'm just going to kind of pound it out with a roller and get it to the width that I want it to be for the slab pot. I've already made some pieces of coil, but I'm just gonna kind of run through just a little bit just to show you what I did. So I've got my piece of slab all set up where I just used the roller on cardboard and I just rolled, a piece out. And then typically what I'll do is, it's kind of nice using the cardboard because you got lines that you can line it up, and then you just cut down. That way you can get it even, or if you have a straight edge, you can use that. And then what I like to do is, for the actual slab coils, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure them out where they are a 1/2 inch, and then I usually just poke a little hole in it at the 1/2 inch mark. And then I'll just take my ruler and line it up. And then I just draw on down. And then I like to use plastic bags quite a bit. So I'll just keep everything that I cut in a plastic bag. That way it stays moist. And I'll just do one more here. I've already cut up some coils. So I have quite a bit that I already need for my pot. This is just to give you an idea of how to do it. And then I typically cut more coils than what I think I might actually need, just because I like having them, in surplus instead of having to stop what I'm doing and then cut another one. And then always make sure that you're not doing this indoors. This is actually kind of like a 2-season porch. It gets pretty warm in the summertime and pretty cool in the winter, but there's a door open outside as well as some doors open downstairs and a bunch of windows and a fan for good ventilation. Also, nobody lives out here, so that's the other bonus. You never want to work with clay where you live. Alright, so that's how you make some little slab coils, and these are actually pretty thick. Because what I'm going to be doing is carving into the coil pot once it gets a little bit dry. So I want it to be more structurally sound, just for what I'm doing. Alright, so this is my workstation, and I just have like a sheet of plastic on the top of this little table, since this is sort of a makeshift work area. And then it's always a good idea to have your sketches out or any reference images that you're working off of, just to kind of guide you on where you're going. So basically what I'm going to do is actually going to be a small little pot, and then I'm going to be carving some detail in it. I haven't quite settled on which carving I'm going to use, but this is more or less what I want the shape of the pot to look like. And then I also have like a little cup of slip. So basically what I do is any like clay that's been like dried out or little pieces that are on the table, I'll just throw them into a little bowl. And then it gets pretty slimy, but it's pretty good for when you're working with clay and you're building any kind of pot with it. And then I also like to have a wet rag out here and a bucket of water. I did spill my bucket of water one time, so now I'm just a little bit more aware of my surroundings and where it's at. So I've already created a base for the pot, and I had another little bowl that I just use as like a template. I just impressed it into the clay, and then that's what I'm using for the base. So now I'm going to take out the coils that I had put together. And then I have this little scoring tool that I like to use quite a bit. And then I have a brush for my slip. There's actually a lot of water on the top, so if I'm not using all of the slip, I'll just use that for water. And then it's just kind of nice to have your workspace all set up before you really get going. So I'm just gonna put my little references over here so I don't get lost while I'm working. And then kind of put some of these coils out. I need to see how big they're going to be around the pot, because like working with some clay, we don't necessarily know like how big. Sometimes as you go taller or wider, they might be bigger, and then you have to like score them a little bit. So right now it looks like my pieces are a little too short. I'm gonna try to keep the pot more evenly going up. If it tapers out or in, like, I'm okay with that. It's not a deal breaker for me. So typically what I'll do is I'll just kind of eyeball and measure about where I need to cut it. And then sometimes I just like using this tool as a knife. And then instead of covering like all my clay up, I'll just kind of lay a bag on top of it. And then typically I use like a piece of wood that's cut up. That way it's easier for me to turn it around and work on the piece as needed. So what I'll do is I will cut these pieces at an angle, because you get kind of a stronger bond when you do that. And then for these little pieces that are off, you can just toss them in your slip bucket if you want. And then like sometimes I really have to think about how you're cutting. If anybody's ever done trim, you kind of run along the same thing. Like, so then same thing over here. You just gotta know where your angle is going. And then what I do is just take my tool and I'll score each side of it. And same thing on this bigger piece. And then on the base of the pot, you want to score it as well. And then on the bottom of your coil. And then on the same thing as your connector piece. Usually I just kind of line it up. That way I know. There we go. Oh, bugger. There we go. So typically before I ever put anything on the pot, I'll just line everything up. That way I know that's where it needs to be. For whatever reason, this is looking funny. Oh, there we go. So what I did on this one is I actually cut it wrong. But that's okay, because it was a little big anyway. Here we go. So that'll work. And then what I like to do is just get it wet. And if you get some slip in there, like, that's good too, because that'll just make sure it adheres that much better. And then I really like these wooden tools, because then what I'll do is I'll just kind of go along the inside while I'm pushing it down. And it's kind of nice working on a shorter table too, because I like to stand up, I've noticed. And then it kind of just gets you a better view of your piece. And then what I'll do is I'll go along the outside of it to make sure that the seam is really tight. I like having that bucket of water, just because, like from this point, as soon as I add a piece, like I make sure the seams are really blended at this point. And it just kind of helps with that, having some extra water by your side. So that's looking pretty good. Just kind of smooth it out, spin it around. And then we'll grab another piece, measure this one out. I do have a fan on so that the plastic bags like to fly around a little bit. So I'm just going to mark this a little bit better. Don't know why I like to get confused. There we go. And then if you don't feel like throwing your clay in the pot all the time, sometimes it's nice to have some smaller wet pieces. So just in case you need them. So I'll just kind of ball them up and make sure that they're under here as well. And again, you're just gonna score your coils. Like we did on the last one. Oops. And then same thing like we did at the base. Normally I like to kind of push down and work on the inside. This is another reason why I like the coils a little bit thicker, because as I'm kind of pushing everything together, you're scraping off, clay. Not a lot, but if you have really thin pieces, the more you scrape off, then the less you might have. And then here's when I'll work on the outside. And then I typically just push down as I go. Use my tool. And these little pieces, these seams are, just need to make sure that they're good and tight as well. And then instead of like cutting on your pot, you want to make sure that you're doing it on the surface. Otherwise, you could smush your pot, because the higher you go, and working with wet clay like this, it's still pretty weak. So you don't want to completely smush it. And then the good thing about rotating it is where you've kind of made your seam on the other side, instead of having your seam in the same place where it might be a little weak, it's nice being able to do it this way, because then it just makes it that much stronger. And then some of that excess that I pull off, with my tool here, sometimes I'll just kind of rub it on the seams a little bit more on the inside. It's feeling pretty strong. And then depending on how tall you want your pot to go, or if you want it to flare out or kind of funnel in, that's completely up to you. And you just keep building it up. Let's just say, for instance, if this was as high as your pot, like as you wanted it to be, while it's wet like this, it's nice to just kind of take your fingers and get a lot of water on it and just smooth out the edges here, because when you fire clay, it does get hard and these edges can be sharp, especially if you're planning on this to be any sort of drinking vessel. It's a lot easier to do it at this stage versus when it's any drier. For my vessel, I think I'm going to have it more as a container, like maybe a little jewelry container. So I think I'm just going to do one more layer. But what I was actually planning on doing was making sort of a scallop on it. So I'm just going to wash my hands off and, use my rag and then kind of get set up for that. But in the meantime, what I usually do is I just cover my piece, especially if I'm gonna move on to something else. That's why it's super handy to have a bunch of plastic bags out. And then just kind of move things to the side. I'll put these coils away. And I will get set up for the next part. All right, so going off of my design and then looking at what we did for the pot, what I was originally gonna do, and I thought this was gonna work out, was I was gonna take one of the long pieces of coil, and then I was gonna use this little, I was gonna try to make like the scallop in it. So what I thought I was gonna do was kind of use this as my guide. It's just like a little toy. And then you see how it's kind of scalloped. I thought that I would do that, but I didn't want them to be so close together. So I went every other one, and it ended up looking pretty crappy. So it's kind of another reason why it's good to have more coils than what you need to kind of practice and play around with it. So then what I ended up deciding on doing is I cut some pieces that are a little bit over a ½ inch, and then what I'm gonna do is score and slip them onto the piece and then kind of round them out. That way they match my original design a little bit better. So that's where I'm at right now. So we'll just start with one, and I like to just put them on the piece. That way you can eyeball it, and typically when you pick it up, you kind of see where the mark is anyway. So then you can score on the bottom and then on the piece where it was, and then just add a little bit of water or your slip, and then just put that on there, and then use your wood tool to make sure that you have a good seal. And then here's where your bucket of water is going to come in pretty handy, because then that's where you can kind of round it out. And then just by looking at this one before I go any further, it's almost a little bit too tall, I think, from where I would want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off. And then I'm just gonna cut a little bit off the top to see if that's kind of a better fit. And it might be that I don't even want to go that tall. Like, that's not even half, but I think that's just gonna blend in too much by the time I put it on there. So I think that's probably a better height. If you can see from one to the other. So I'm going to go with that one right there. So what I'm going to do right now is just kind of measure it up with the rest of the pieces, and then just cut off that little bit. And since that one's pretty wet, I'm going to leave that one there and then use this one since it's a little bit more dry. Yeah, that'll be much better. I have found that being kind of a newbie to ceramics, that there's somewhat a lot of trial and error involved, and not to be too discouraged when like your plan like in your head doesn't really quite work out in person. So you just kind of got to roll with it. So I'm just going to get that wet, a little bit wet again, and then kind of Still pretty sticky, but I'm just gonna add some more slip on that one. Kind of looks like a little castle at this point. Just kind of fun too. But I'll add some feet on the bottom of it. I'll let it dry out just a little bit more. And then what I actually might do, so it doesn't look so much like a castle and looks more like my design after I get the rest of them, is I might carve out just a little on the bottom so I get more of a scalloped look. Just gonna move my bucket up here to make it just a little bit easier. It's better. And then as I am pushing these down too, like they're getting a little wide, which is fine because I think that's going to look better anyway and maybe not so castle-like. And as you spin it around too, you can kind of see a little bit more if you think you need to kind of push areas down a little bit to get a better connection. dry. That is the little dog, Seuss, and he is a little spastic. I'm pretty sure they're barking at nothing right now. And there we have it. So those are kind of my pieces. I think that worked out a lot better than trying to do what I originally thought, where I was gonna carve into a coil and make the scallops on there and then adhere it. I think it, well, I know it would have just been a big mess and it wasn't looking very good. So now I'm just gonna kind of wash some of this clay off my hands a little bit. This is why I like having a rag out here, and then any tools that I'm not using, then I'll just throw in the bucket. And kind of clean up just a little bit. And then before I go too further, I think I'm gonna switch over to a clean piece of wood. Let that dry for just a second. Because what will happen is this will stick to it. So I like having this plastic ruler, because then you can just kind of wedge it up. You can see it's moving now. And then you can kind of feel the bottom. Excuse me. All right. So now what I'm gonna try to do is carve it out just a little bit, and I have this knife. It's more like a potter's carving knife. I don't know if that's actually what it's used for, but so I'm just gonna kind of carve out just a little bit on the bottom to maybe get me more in line with what I was thinking, so it's not so straight. I'm going to try to maybe work this more by hand. To get a scallop in there. I think that's pretty good. It's pretty much where I want it to be for right now. So what I'm gonna do, instead of covering it back up, I want it to actually dry out quite a bit, because then I'm gonna add some feet on the bottom. And so what's gonna happen by just leaving it uncovered is all the water is gonna seep to the bottom, which is gonna make the top dry out and more sturdy. That way I can flip it over and then add feet to the bottom side. And then once I have those feet attached, I can do the same thing to that side. Let it dry out, and then all the water is gonna essentially seep back to the top. And then I can cover it with a plastic bag and make sure that it's like the tops are a little bit more moist and things don't crack, and then just kind of care for it a little bit more. Still kind of looks like a castle, but that's okay. It might be that after it dries out a little bit more, I might want to shave some of these pieces down, or maybe once the feet get on there, it might kind of fall in line with the design a little bit more. And maybe the way it looks right now might kind of dictate what type of carving I'm gonna put in there versus just going off of like one of my sketches, and you know, without taking into consideration what the form looks like right now. So that's where we're gonna leave it. I'm just gonna let it dry out. That is kind of the nice thing about working in a summer environment. It does dry out a lot quicker than it would if you were in like a enclosed studio environment. So I'm just gonna clean up my work area a little bit, and then put these tools in my bucket, and then let this little fellow dry out. But so far that's where we're at. So that's just basically the lowdown of making a little coil pot. And then if you wanted to put any sort of like scallop top on there or any other kind of design, I guess what found out it's better to do like little chunks and then kind of mold them into the top versus carving into like another coil and then kind of expecting it to work that way. All right, see you guys again pretty soon.